Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. It began with a torn photograph. That's all investigators had when they arrived at Hollow Creek Road in Newton County, Arkansas, deep in the heart of the Ozark Mountains in the autumn of 1947. A faded image showing 5 men standing before the entrance of an abandoned zinc mine, their faces worn from years of labor, eyes squinting against the harsh sun. The photograph had been discovered in a wooden box alongside property records for a small parcel of land near what locals called Whispering Valley, approximately 15 miles northeast of Jasper. What made this particular photograph unusual wasn't the subjects themselves, but rather what appeared in the background, a sixth figure, partially obscured by shadow, standing at a distance from the others. The records office in Harrison had no explanation for how the box ended up filed among county plat maps, nor could anyone identify the men pictured. The story of what happened at Whispering Valley remained largely unknown until 1967, when a drought revealed what the rising waters of Table Rock Lake had concealed for decades. A rural postal carrier named Vernon Massey reported something peculiar while driving his route along the dried shoreline. What appeared to be the remnants of a small settlement had emerged from the receding waters. Foundations of cabins, a collapsed water tower, rusted mining equipment, and most notably, the entrance to an old mine shaft sealed with concrete and reinforced with iron bars. Vernon's report sparked the interest of Dr. Zachary Merik, a historian from the University of Arkansas who specialized in documenting the region's abandoned mining communities. Dr. Merik arrived in Newton County in May of 1967, hoping to include the settlement in his upcoming publication on forgotten Ozark communities. According to his journal entries, now preserved in the Arkansas Historical Archives, he spent 3 weeks interviewing elderly residents about what they remembered of the valley before it was flooded. Most claimed to have no knowledge of any settlement, despite records indicating the existence of a mining operation there between 1927 and 1948. However, an 82-year-old former county clerk named Dorothy Caldwell recalled something unusual about the property. People didn't go to Whispering Valley unless they had business with Stockton, she told Dr. Merik, and nobody wanted business with Stockton. This Stockton, Dr. Merik discovered, was Augustus Stockton, who purchased the land in 1927, according to property records. The name Stockton appeared again on mining permits issued the following year, though interestingly, no zinc or lead deposits had been officially documented in that particular area. What caught Dr. Merik's attention was the abrupt cessation of all records relating to Stockton or his mining operation after April 1948. No sale of the property was recorded, no death certificate filed, and the mining permits were neither renewed nor formally abandoned. It was as if Augustus Stockton and whatever operation he ran in Whispering Valley simply vanished. The historian's interest grew when he discovered that Stockton had arrived in the Ozarks from somewhere in the Northeast, Boston, according to the few records available, with considerable financial resources but no apparent background in mining or engineering. Yet within months, he had established what appeared to be a sophisticated operation employing dozens of workers recruited primarily from outside the region. Local suppliers reported that Stockton's operation consumed vast quantities of electrical equipment, specialized metals, and chemical compounds typically associated with research laboratories rather than mineral extraction. As Dr. Merik expanded his research, he uncovered troubling patterns. Between 1929 and 1948, 17 people were reported missing within a 50-mile radius of Whispering Valley. While this might not seem extraordinary over a 20-year period, what struck Dr. Merik was that none of these cases were ever resolved. The missing included 4 mine workers from Zinc, Arkansas, a geologist from the University of Missouri, 3 hikers from Illinois, 4 campers from Springfield who had been staying in the Buffalo River area, a land surveyor working for the state, and 5 local men who had supposedly left to seek work in California. The most unsettling aspect of these disappearances was the complete lack of evidence. No bodies were ever recovered, no personal belongings found, no witnesses came forward with information. Local law enforcement had investigated at the time, but found nothing conclusive to link the cases. Dr. Merik noted in his journal, "It's as if these 17 people simply stepped outside the bounds of existence, leaving behind only paperwork and worried families." In June 1967, Dr. Merik requested permission from the Army Corps of Engineers to examine the sealed mine entrance at the Whispering Valley site. His request was initially denied, but after appealing to congressional representatives, he was granted limited access under supervision. According to the official report filed afterward, the mine entrance had been professionally sealed with reinforced concrete sometime in 1948. When a small section was removed for inspection, engineers discovered the tunnel had collapsed approximately 20 feet in, making further exploration impossible without extensive excavation. The project was deemed too dangerous and costly, and the opening was resealed. What the official report failed to mention, but what Dr. Merik documented in his private journal, was the discovery of unusual markings carved into the rock face around the mine entrance. These markings resembled no known mining notation system and appeared to form patterns that Dr. Merik described as deliberate but indecipherable. He made rubbings of these markings, which he included in his papers now archived at the university. Analysis by linguistics experts years later would determine the markings shared structural similarities with Sumerian cuneiform, but contained symbols never documented in any known ancient writing system. Dr. Merik's investigation might have ended there had it not been for a chance encounter at a diner in Harrison. An elderly man overheard his conversation with a research assistant and approached their table. He identified himself as Clayton Deaver, a former equipment supplier who had done business with various mining operations throughout the Ozarks in the 1930s and 40s. Deaver claimed to have made several deliveries to Whispering Valley between 1933 and 1945, but had never been allowed beyond a small clearing where supplies were transferred to Stockton's men. "They weren't mining anything worth selling," Deaver told Dr. Merik. "I knew every operation in 3 counties, what they were pulling out, what equipment they needed. These fellows ordered strange things, electrical components I'd never seen before, special alloys, glass containers by the crate. When I asked what they were mining, they'd say zinc like everyone else, but I never saw a single ore cart come out of that valley, never saw the same worker twice either, except for Stockton." Deaver's description of Augustus Stockton was particularly disturbing. He recalled a tall, gaunt man with an unusual accent that didn't sound local or even American. "He spoke like he was choosing every word very carefully," Deaver said, "and he had this way of looking at you, like he was measuring something. Never blinked much. Gave me the shivers every time." The most troubling detail Deaver shared concerned an incident in the winter of 1938. He had arrived earlier than scheduled with a delivery and witnessed several workers emerging from the mine entrance. "They walked strange," he recalled. "Real stiff-like, almost mechanical. Their skin had this grayish tint, and they wouldn't look at anything directly." When Stockton noticed Deaver watching, he immediately sent the workers back inside and personally unloaded the supplies, dismissing Deaver without allowing him to complete the delivery paperwork, as was their usual practice. "After that, they started having me leave deliveries at a new spot, almost a mile from the actual site," Deaver said. "Someone would always come collect them after I left. I never saw inside that valley again." In July 1967, Dr. Merik located a woman named Esther Lindström, living in a nursing home in Springfield, Missouri. She identified herself as the widow of Harold Lindström, one of the 4 mine workers reported missing in 1937. According to Mrs. Lindström, Her husband had been unemployed for nearly a year when he was offered a position at Stockton's operation through an acquaintance. The job paid remarkably well, 3 times the going rate for mine work, but required workers to live on site for 3-month stretches. Harold Lindström completed 2 such work periods, returning home for 2 weeks between shifts. During his second return, Mrs. Lindström recalled, her husband appeared profoundly changed. He had lost considerable weight, suffered from insomnia, and would often stare silently at nothing for hours. When she asked about his work, he refused to discuss it, saying only that it was different than what he expected. He returned for his 3rd shift in October 1937 and was never seen again. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Lindström received an envelope containing 6 months' wages and a brief note explaining that her husband had accepted a permanent position and would not be returning. The note was signed by Augustus Stockton. When she reported her husband missing, local authorities made inquiries, but were told by Stockton that Lindström had quit without notice and mentioned plans to seek work in California. With no evidence of foul play and a war looming on the horizon, the investigation stalled and eventually ceased altogether. Mrs. Lindström kept one unusual item from her husband's brief returns home, a small notebook where he had apparently attempted to document his experiences without explicitly violating whatever confidentiality agreement he had signed. The entries were often cryptic and became increasingly disjointed over time. Dr. Merik was permitted to photograph several pages, which he included in his research files. One entry, dated September 14, 1937, read, "The sounds from level 4 continue. S. says it's normal settling of the earth at that depth, but none of us believe him. Jenkins went down yesterday and came back different somehow. Says nothing happened, but his eyes tell another story." Another entry from September 29th stated simply, "The air changes when you go past the second checkpoint. It feels thicker, like water almost. Time moves wrong down there. My watch stopped for 3 hours today, then suddenly started again when I returned to the surface." The final entry, dated October 2, 1937, just before Lindström's return to the site, was the most disturbing. "I don't want to go back, but the dreams won't stop unless I'm there. I see what's behind the sealed door on level 6. It's waiting for something. For us, maybe. S knows more than he says. The formulas on his blackboard aren't for mining anything from this earth." Dr. Merik's research took an even darker turn when he discovered a series of medical reports filed by a Dr. Howard Latham at a small hospital in Harrison between 1935 and 1948. These reports documented 7 patients admitted with similar symptoms: extreme photosensitivity, unexplained weight loss, cognitive difficulties, and an unusual graying of the skin. All 7 patients had one thing in common. They had worked at the mine in Whispering Valley for at least one 3-month period. The reports indicated that the patients deteriorated rapidly despite treatment, with 5 dying within weeks of admission. The remaining 2 disappeared from the hospital before treatment was completed. Dr. Latham's notes expressed frustration at his inability to diagnose the condition and suggested some form of industrial poisoning related to the mining work. Most notably, Dr. Latham had preserved tissue samples from 3 of the deceased workers. These samples, stored at the hospital's pathology department, were examined by Dr. Merik with the assistance of a medical colleague. According to their notes, the tissue displayed highly unusual properties, including cellular structures that didn't conform to normal human histology and trace elements of an unidentified metallic compound that appeared to have been gradually replacing the organic material. The samples were later confiscated by federal authorities during an unannounced inspection of the hospital in 1968, shortly after Dr. Merik had viewed them. In August 1967, Dr. Merik managed to track down Joseph Hargrove, a former security guard who had worked at the Whispering Valley facility for 6 months in 1946. Hargrove was initially reluctant to discuss his experiences, but eventually agreed to a recorded interview on condition that it not be released until after his death. In this recording, now stored in the university archives, Hargrove described a facility far more extensive than the small mining operation it purported to be. There were at least 6 levels below ground, Hargrove stated. I was only permitted access to the first 2, which contained standard mining equipment and what looked like research laboratories. The lower levels were restricted to those with special clearance. Guards were positioned at checkpoints between levels, and we were under strict orders never to allow unauthorized personnel to pass, regardless of circumstances. Hargrove described unusual security protocols, including weekly changes to coded phrases required for access to different areas and periodic sweeps for unauthorized recording devices or written materials. Most concerning was his description of the containment procedures for certain areas on the lower levels. We were issued special suits to wear when escorting authorized personnel to level 3 and below, he recalled. These weren't standard mining safety gear. They covered every inch of skin and included air tanks, more like what you'd expect for handling dangerous chemicals. We were told never to remove any part of the suit until after we'd gone through decontamination, no matter what happened down there. When asked what was being contained, Hargrove claimed not to know specifically, but mentioned overhearing scientists discussing anomalous material and non-standard physical properties. He also described unusual occurrences that defied explanation. Objects would move without being touched, he said. Not sliding or falling, lifting up and floating. I saw a wrench rise 6 feet off a workbench and hover there for almost a minute before dropping. When I reported it, my supervisor just nodded and made a note in his logbook like it was a perfectly normal thing to happen. Most disturbing was Hargrove's account of what he called the incident that led to his resignation. In February 1947, alarms sounded throughout the facility, and all personnel were ordered to evacuate immediately, except for Stockton and a select team of researchers. When they were permitted to return 3 days later, the entire 3rd level had been sealed off and several employees were missing. No explanation was ever given, Hargrove said. Those men who disappeared, Roth, Alvarez, Kinsler, their names were never mentioned again. When another guard asked about them, he was removed from the site the next day. I put in my notice that week. Some things aren't worth any amount of pay. By September 1967, Dr. Merik's research had attracted unwanted attention. His office at the university was broken into, though nothing appeared to have been taken. He reported receiving strange phone calls where the caller would remain silent for several minutes before hanging up. Most alarmingly, he discovered someone had entered his home while he was at work, leaving the torn photograph he had been researching placed carefully on his pillow. According to his journal entries from this period, he believed he was being followed. In late September, Dr. Merik received an anonymous package containing several documents that appeared to be internal communications from the Whispering Valley facility. These included partial research notes, personnel logs, and most significantly, a hand-drawn map showing the layout of the underground levels. The map indicated 7 levels, not 6 as Hargrove had stated, with the 7th labeled simply Isolation Zone, Authorized Personnel Only. A handwritten note accompanying these materials read only, "They're still watching. Be careful. Dr. Craig." Merik attempted to authenticate these documents through various academic channels, but was consistently met with bureaucratic obstacles. His requests for assistance from colleagues in relevant fields were declined without explanation. Funding for his broader research into abandoned Ozark communities was abruptly canceled by the university administration, citing budget constraints despite the project having been fully funded through the following year. On October 3, 1967, Dr. Merik drove to the Newton County Courthouse to examine additional property records. He never arrived. His car was found the next day parked at a scenic overlook near the Buffalo River, his research materials still inside, but no sign of Dr. Merik himself. A search was conducted for several weeks, but yielded no results. Like the 17 others before him, Zachary Merik had vanished without a trace. The investigation into his disappearance uncovered something unusual, however. Merik's possessions was a small notebook containing what appeared to be transcribed interviews with an individual identified only as Subject H. The interviews detailed experiences working in the lower chambers of an unnamed facility where the air felt different and time didn't move right. The subject described sounds like whispers but not human that would emanate from deeper passages, and how workers would sometimes stand perfectly still, listening to nothing, for hours. Most disturbing was the subject's claim that some who went to the bottom levels came back changed, like something had been removed and something else put in its place. The authenticity of these interviews could not be verified, and investigators ultimately concluded they were likely notes for a work of fiction Merik was writing alongside his historical research. Among Doctor, the case was officially closed in 1968, with authorities suggesting Merik had likely fallen into the river while hiking and been swept away. His body was never recovered. The story might have ended there, forgotten like so many other rural mysteries, had it not been for the actions of Carolyn Merik, Zachary's widow. Convinced that her husband's disappearance was connected to his research, she compiled his notes, journals, and findings into a comprehensive file that she submitted to various newspapers, law enforcement agencies, and congressional representatives. Most dismissed her claims as the desperate theories of a grieving widow, but one young journalist from the Arkansas Gazette took an interest. Raymond Parker spent much of 1969 retracing Dr. Merik's investigation, interviewing many of the same sources and searching for additional information. His most significant discovery came through a Freedom of Information Act request that revealed the U.S. Geological Survey had conducted a classified assessment of the Whispering Valley area in 1948, immediately prior to the mine being sealed. The heavily redacted documents Parker obtained indicated unusual readings that the report described as consistent with exposure to unknown radiation source and recommended immediate containment and restricted access. Parker also located a former employee of the Army Corps of Engineers who had been part of the team that constructed Table Rock Dam in the late 1950s. This individual, speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed that the original plans for the reservoir had been altered specifically to ensure Whispering Valley would be flooded under at least 60 feet of water. When Parker asked why, the former employee said simply, "Some things are better left buried." Through persistent investigation, Parker discovered that between 1948 and 1956, the area surrounding Whispering Valley had been quietly purchased by a series of shell corporations that eventually transferred ownership to the federal government. These transactions were deliberately obscured through complex legal maneuvers, effectively erasing the valley from public records. When Parker attempted to access these land records, he found many had been removed from county archives, allegedly for restoration and preservation. Parker's research led him to Westbrook Psychiatric Hospital in Jefferson City, Missouri, where a former researcher from the Whispering Valley facility had been committed in 1950. Dr. Malcolm Reed, once a respected physicist, had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia after making increasingly bizarre claims about his work under Augustus Stockton. Hospital records indicated Reed frequently spoke of dimensional anomalies, non-Euclidean space, and entities that exist between perceptions. Most psychiatric professionals had dismissed Reed's statements as classic delusional patterns, but Parker noted disturbing consistencies between Reed's supposedly hallucinatory descriptions and details from other accounts of the Whispering Valley operation. Reed spoke of chambers where gravity fluctuates and passages that seem longer when you return than when you first traverse them, descriptions that aligned with Joseph Hargrove's statements about unusual phenomena in the lower levels. Parker arranged an interview with Dr. Reed, which was granted only after considerable negotiation with hospital administrators. The transcript of this interview, never published but preserved among Parker's papers, reveals a man who, despite his apparent mental illness, maintained a coherent and technically sophisticated understanding of theoretical physics. Reed spoke at length about the breach, as he called it, a phenomenon he claimed the Whispering Valley team had discovered deep within the Ozark Mountains. It wasn't a cave or a mineral deposit, Reed explained. It was a place where the fabric between dimensions had worn thin. Stockton didn't find it by accident. He came looking for it specifically. There were legends, you see, old stories from the original settlers about a place in those hills where strange things happened. Indigenous peoples avoided that valley entirely. Stockton had collected these accounts for years before establishing his operation. When Parker asked what exactly had been discovered in the lower levels, Reed became visibly agitated. "We opened something that should have remained closed," he said. "A doorway, but not in any sense you would understand. What came through wasn't matter as we comprehend it. It influenced, rather than interacted, changed the properties of things nearby, including people." Stockton called it the influence. "We were studying it, trying to understand its properties, perhaps harness them, but it was studying us too, learning, adapting." Reed claimed that as the research progressed, the phenomena spread, becoming increasingly difficult to contain. Workers exposed to the influence began exhibiting unusual abilities and behavioral changes. Some could perceive things others couldn't, while others developed an uncanny synchronicity, moving and speaking in perfect unison, despite being in different parts of the facility. The most severely affected became what Reed called conduits, of individuals who appeared to be under some form of external control. The incident in 1947 was a containment failure, Reed stated. Something came through fully for the first time. 3 researchers and 2 security personnel were, I don't have the language to describe it adequately. Absorbed is perhaps closest. We sealed the level, but it wasn't enough. Stockton knew we were losing control. That's when the decision was made to shut everything down and seal it permanently. When Parker asked what had happened to Stockton and the remaining personnel, Reed fell silent for several minutes before responding. Stockton had changed by then, he said quietly. He spent more time on the lower levels than anyone else. The last time I saw him, he was explaining how we needed to prepare for what was coming. His eyes, they weren't human anymore, Mr. Parker. As for the others, some left, sworn to secrecy. Others stayed with Stockton. They believed in what he had become. Reed's final statement in the interview was perhaps the most chilling. They're not gone, you know. They're contained, submerged, but still there, still waiting. Water isn't a barrier to them. It's merely a different medium. In some ways, it's more conducive to their existence than air. Every year, the influence grows stronger. The containment won't hold forever. 3 weeks after this interview, Dr. Malcolm Reed was found dead in his room at Westbrook Hospital. The official cause was listed as heart failure, but a nurse who discovered the body reported that Reed's eyes were open and his expression was one of extreme terror. Most unusually, the room temperature was recorded at just above freezing despite the summer heat and functional climate control in the rest of the building. The most chilling account Parker uncovered came from a retired sheriff's deputy named William Tanner, who had been part of the last official visit to the Whispering Valley site in April 1948. According to Tanner, he accompanied 2 federal agents to serve papers to Augustus Stockton regarding tax discrepancies. When they arrived, they found the site completely abandoned, equipment still running, personal belongings left behind, food on tables, but no people. Tanner estimated about 30 individuals had been living and working there based on the accommodations. It was like they all just got up and walked away in the middle of what they were doing, Tanner told Parker. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing missing except the people themselves. But there was something wrong with the place. The air felt heavy, and there was this constant sound, like the wind through pine needles, except there wasn't any wind, and the pine trees were too far away to hear. We all felt it, this sense that we were being observed from every direction at once. Tanner described how they discovered the mine entrance barricaded from the inside with mining equipment. The federal agents called for backup, and when additional personnel arrived the following day, they forced entry into the mine. Tanner was not permitted to enter, but recalled that the team that went in emerged less than an hour later, visibly shaken. One agent was speaking gibberish and had to be sedated. Immediately afterward, Tanner was told to leave while they secured the site. He was later required to sign numerous confidentiality agreements and warned never to discuss what he had seen. "I kept my mouth shut all these years," Tanner told Parker, "but I'm an old man now, and I still lie awake sometimes thinking about that place. I've never felt anything like it, before or since. It was wrong somehow, fundamentally wrong, like walking into a photograph where the perspective isn't quite right." What Tanner didn't tell Parker, but later confided to his grandson in a recorded conversation made shortly before his death in 1985, was that he had secretly returned to the site a week after the official visit, driven by an inexplicable compulsion he couldn't resist. He found the area surrounded by military personnel and unusual equipment being installed around the mine entrance. Most disturbing was his observation of several individuals in protective suits taking regular readings from the surrounding soil, vegetation, and water sources, then immediately incinerating the samples after documentation. "They were burning everything that had been close to that mine," Tanner said in the recording. "Even the dirt, like they were afraid it was contaminated somehow, or changed." Parker's investigation culminated in a lengthy article submitted to his editor at the Arkansas Gazette in December 1969. The piece was never published. According to the paper's records, Parker took an unexpected leave of absence shortly after submission and eventually resigned his position. His original manuscript was not found in the paper's archives, and Parker himself seemingly disappeared from the journalistic world entirely. In a strange epilogue to this story, a safety inspection of Table Rock Dam in 1978 revealed concerning structural weaknesses that required extensive repairs. During this process, engineers discovered that the section of the reservoir directly above Whispering Valley had developed an unusual thermal anomaly, with water temperatures nearly 10 degrees warmer than surrounding areas. No explanation for this anomaly was ever officially provided, though the area was subsequently designated a restricted zone, ostensibly for wildlife conservation purposes. In 1983, a recreational diver exploring the reservoir, despite the restrictions, reported seeing structures on the lake bed that didn't look like natural formations or typical human construction. Before he could return for a closer examination, he suffered an unexplained seizure that ended his diving career. His camera, which might have captured images of whatever he saw, was reportedly damaged beyond repair by water exposure. The U.S. Geological Survey has conducted regular assessments of the area every 5 years since 1980. These reports remain classified, with only minimal information available through Freedom of Information Act requests. What little data has been released shows fluctuating radiation levels that officials attribute to natural background variation. Independent experts who have reviewed this data suggest the patterns are inconsistent with any known natural phenomenon, but hesitate to speculate further without access to complete readings. Perhaps most disturbing of all is what happened in the winter of 1997, when record low temperatures caused unusual ice formations on parts of Table Rock Lake. Satellite imagery captured during this period shows a perfect circle of unfrozen water approximately 300 feet in diameter, directly above where the Whispering Valley mine would be located. When questioned, environmental officials suggested a previously unknown hot spring might be responsible, though no follow-up studies were ever conducted to confirm this theory. A series of unexplained wildlife deaths around this section of the lake has occurred with increasing frequency since the early 2000s. Fish washing ashore exhibit unusual mutations, extra fins, displaced eyes, and in some cases, skeletal structures that appear partially dissolved. Autopsies performed on these specimens have yielded inconclusive results, though several biologists involved in these examinations have reportedly developed unusual health problems themselves. primarily neurological in nature. In 2008, a group of graduate students from Missouri State University's Environmental Science program conducted unauthorized water sampling in the restricted zone as part of a broader study on reservoir ecosystems. Their results showed extreme anomalies in the chemical composition of water taken from directly above the Whispering Valley location. Most notably, they discovered microscopic metallic particles suspended in the water that displayed properties inconsistent with any known element or compound. When the students attempted to publish their findings, they were contacted by federal authorities who confiscated their samples and research notes, citing national security concerns. Between 2010 and 2023, 7 individuals have disappeared while boating or fishing in the vicinity of the restricted zone. In each case, empty boats were found drifting with personal belongings still aboard and no signs of accident or foul play. Search and recovery operations found no traces of the missing persons. Local authorities attribute these disappearances to drowning and underwater currents carrying the bodies away. But some family members of the missing have noted disturbing similarities to the historical disappearances associated with Whispering Valley. Most recently, in early 2024, a severe earthquake centered near the New Madrid fault line caused minor damage throughout the Ozark region. Seismologists noted unusual patterns in the aftershocks with a distinct concentration around the Table Rock Lake area. Monitoring equipment temporarily placed near the restricted zone recorded what one researcher described as rhythmic fluctuations that suggest artificial rather than natural seismic activity. This data was later reclassified as erroneous due to equipment malfunction. Hikers in the area reported hearing what they described as mechanical humming coming from beneath the lake surface. Park rangers dismissed these accounts as the sound of distant boat motors distorted by atmospheric conditions. However, similar reports have persisted, often accompanied by descriptions of unusual pressure changes and momentary disorientation experienced by those in proximity to that section of the lake. Local resident Marion Hawkins, whose family has lived in the area for generations, shared a disturbing account with a regional paranormal research group in 2020. Hawkins claimed that during periods of drought when the lake level drops significantly, unusual lights can sometimes be seen beneath the water surface at night. Not like reflections, she emphasized. These lights move with purpose, forming patterns that almost look like writing sometimes. My grandfather used to say that's how they communicate with each other, whoever they are. Even more concerning are reports from several independent sources describing what they call watchers, individuals who appear near the restricted zone during unusual weather events or seismic activity. These figures are consistently described as tall, gaunt, and unnaturally still, observing the lake from a distance before disappearing when approached. Some witnesses claim these individuals wear outdated clothing and display unusual mannerisms, while others report a more disturbing detail, that the watchers sometimes stand perfectly motionless for hours, even during heavy rain or severe conditions. In 2018, a retired Army Corps of Engineers employee broke decades of silence to share what he knew about the original flooding of Whispering Valley. Under condition of anonymity, he revealed that the dam project had been modified specifically to ensure that particular area would be submerged under the deepest part of the reservoir. The engineers were told that maximum water pressure was essential for containment purposes, he explained. Nobody questioned what was being contained. We just followed orders. But there were other precautions too. Layers of concrete and specialized metals poured over the site before the waters rose. Whatever's down there, they wanted it buried under more than just water. He also described unusual equipment installed around the perimeter of the valley before flooding. Devices he believed were monitoring stations designed to detect changes in radiation, air composition, and other environmental factors. These stations were supposedly hardened against water damage and connected to secure communication lines that bypassed normal channels. They expected something might happen, he concluded. They were preparing for containment failure even before the lake existed. What truly happened at Whispering Valley remains unknown. The 17 people who disappeared between 1929 and 1948, along with Dr. Merik, journalist Raymond Parker, and the more recent missing persons, have never been found. No death certificates were ever issued, no remains recovered. The sealed mine lies beneath the waters of Table Rock Lake, inaccessible without specialized equipment and permissions that have been consistently denied to independent researchers. Augustus Stockton, the enigmatic figure at the center of this mystery, left no trace of his existence beyond property records and mining permits. No photographs, no personal history, no record of where he came from before appearing in the Ozarks, or where he might have gone after abandoning his operation. The few descriptions provided by those who encountered him portray a man who seemed somehow disconnected from normal human behavior and expression. In 2015, an elderly woman named Sarah Lindström, claiming to be the granddaughter of Harold Lindström, one of the original missing workers, contacted several news outlets with what she described as a journal her grandmother had kept hidden until her death. The journal purportedly contained entries from Esther Lindström detailing strange occurrences following her husband's disappearance. Phantom phone calls where no one spoke, but strange humming could be heard, objects moving without being touched, and most disturbingly, occasions when she believed she saw her husband standing at a distance, watching her home, but appearing wrong somehow, and vanishing when approached. Sarah Lindström arranged to meet with a reporter from a regional newspaper, but never appeared for the interview. When authorities conducted a welfare check at her residence, they found no sign of forced entry or struggle, but Sarah was gone. Her personal belongings, including the journal she had mentioned, were missing as well. The case remains open but inactive due to lack of evidence. Some have suggested that the Whispering Valley operation was a classified government research facility, perhaps experimenting with radioactive materials or new mining techniques. Others propose that Stockton discovered something in the depths of the Ozark Mountains that was never meant to be found. Some geological anomaly or natural resource that defied conventional understanding. A few fringe theories even suggest connections to the numerous cave systems that honeycomb the region, speculating about undiscovered passages leading to previously unknown depths. What we know with certainty is remarkably little. People vanished. A mine was sealed. A valley was deliberately flooded. Records were classified. Questions remain unanswered. In 1999, the son of one of the missing mine workers petitioned to have his father legally declared dead, more than 60 years after his disappearance. During the proceeding, an elderly man claiming to be a former employee at the Whispering Valley facility attempted to provide testimony but suffered a fatal heart attack in the courthouse before speaking. No identification was found on his person, and subsequent investigations could not determine his identity. The case file notes only that he was carrying a small polished stone that appeared to emit a faint luminescence under certain lighting conditions. The stone was logged into evidence but disappeared from the courthouse property room 3 days later. Curiously, in the weeks following this incident, several court employees reported experiencing vivid, identical nightmares involving submerged structures and lights moving beneath dark water. These dreams reportedly ceased after a month, though one clerk continued to suffer from persistent insomnia and eventually took early retirement, moving far from the Ozarks region altogether. The waters of Table Rock Lake continue to rise and fall with the seasons. Fish swim above the submerged foundations of a community that officially never existed. Pleasure boats drift unknowingly over the sealed entrance to a mine whose purpose remains unclear. And occasionally, when the wind blows just right across that particular stretch of water, visitors report hearing something that sounds almost like distant human voices, engaged in a conversation just below the threshold of comprehension. The local tourism board avoids mentioning Whispering Valley in its promotional materials. Older residents change the subject when asked about it. Maps from before 1950 that showed the location have become collector's items, quietly purchased at premium prices whenever they appear in estate sales or online auctions. A paranormal research team that attempted to conduct an investigation near the restricted zone in 2019 reported multiple equipment failures, including cameras, audio recorders, and measuring devices that functioned perfectly elsewhere but malfunctioned or produced corrupted data when brought within approximately 1 mile of the site. More concerning was their claim that 2 team members experienced temporary disorientation and memory gaps during the investigation, unable to account for approximately 3 hours of time, despite having no evidence of medical issues that might explain such episodes. In 2022, a security guard working at the Table Rock Dam reported an unusual incident during a night shift. At approximately 3:15 a.m., monitoring equipment detected movement in a restricted area near the location of Whispering Valley. Security cameras showed what appeared to be several individuals moving along the shoreline, but when security personnel arrived to investigate, they found no one. Review of the footage afterward showed the figures moving with unusual fluidity and occasionally seeming to fade partially from view. The guard who filed the report was transferred to another facility the following week, and the incident was officially attributed to camera malfunction and light distortion. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Perhaps some truths are better left submerged beneath calm waters, hidden from the light of scrutiny and rational explanation. But for the families of the missing, for those who remember the strange events surrounding Whispering Valley, and for anyone who has ever stood on the shores of Table Rock Lake feeling an inexplicable sense of being observed, the questions linger like ripples spreading across still water. What was Augustus Stockton searching for beneath the Ozark Mountains? What did he find? And most importantly, is it truly contained or merely waiting, suspended in the darkness beneath the lake, growing stronger as the years pass, whispering to anyone who might listen? In 1965, a sonar survey conducted by a team from Missouri State University detected what appeared to be a series of regularly spaced objects on the lakebed near the Whispering Valley location. When they attempted to return for a more detailed examination, their research permit was suddenly revoked without explanation. One graduate student involved in this project later claimed that the preliminary data showed structures that appeared to have been purposely arranged in geometric patterns inconsistent with both natural formations and standard human architecture. The last known photograph of Dr. Zachary Merik, taken the day before his disappearance, shows him sitting at his desk reviewing documents. In the background, barely visible through his office window, stands a tall figure that Mrs. Merik could not identify. When the photograph was examined years later using digital enhancement technology, analysts noted that the figure appeared to be wearing outdated clothing consistent with styles from the 1940s. More disturbing was the observation that the figure's features seemed slightly blurred, even when the rest of the image was rendered in sharp detail. A retired nurse who had worked at the Harrison Hospital during the period when the mysterious patients were treated came forward in 2005 with a disturbing account. She claimed that one patient, in the final stages of his unexplained illness, had developed unusual abilities. Objects would move when he was agitated, she recalled. Lights would flicker, and we'd find things rearranged in his room with no explanation. But most frightening was how he would sometimes speak in perfect unison with other patients, even when they were in different rooms. They would recite the same words simultaneously, often in what sounded like multiple languages overlapping. She also described the patient's skin condition in greater detail than the medical records had provided. It wasn't just grayish, she explained. It had a subtle metallic quality, almost like it was transforming into something else. In the final stages, their skin would develop patterns, not like rashes or lesions, but geometric lines and curves that almost seemed to form symbols or writing. The nurse had kept a personal journal during this period, which she provided to researchers. Among her entries was a disturbing description of the final moments of one patient. His eyes changed at the end. The pupils expanded until there was no iris left, just blackness. And in that blackness, I swear I could see something moving, like looking through a window into somewhere else. He grabbed my arm and said, "They're coming through now." He showed us the door, and they're coming through. Then he just stopped, not died exactly. Just stopped, like a machine powering down. In 2016, a geology professor specializing in cave systems conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys of areas surrounding Table Rock Lake, ostensibly as part of a broader study of Ozark karst topography. His findings, published in an obscure academic journal, included an unusual observation. The bedrock beneath Whispering Valley showed evidence of what he termed non-random cavitation, cave formations that appeared to follow mathematically precise patterns inconsistent with natural erosion processes. More intriguing was his detection of what seemed to be metallic deposits arranged in concentric circles around a central point directly beneath where Stockton's mine would have been located. When other researchers attempted to replicate his findings, they discovered the specific coordinates of his survey had been incorrectly recorded, making verification impossible. The professor declined further interviews on the subject and eventually accepted a research position at a private institution, his subsequent work focusing on entirely different geographical areas. The official records concerning Whispering Valley remained sealed until 2048, 100 years after the mine was abandoned. Whether they will provide answers or merely deepen the mystery remains to be seen. Until then, the waters of Table Rock Lake keep their secrets, the surrounding forest stands silent witness, and occasionally someone goes missing in the Ozarks, leaving behind only questions that echo unanswered through the ancient valleys. Recent climate models predict increasing drought conditions in the Ozark region over the coming decades. Some speculate that if water levels drop significantly, what lies beneath Table Rock Lake might once again be exposed to the light of day. Whether anyone would recognize what they were seeing or understand the implications of its reemergence is perhaps the most unsettling question of all. For now, tourists continue to vacation on the lake's shores. Fishermen cast their lines into its depths, and most locals go about their lives, giving little thought to what might lie beneath the placid surface. But on quiet nights, when the wind falls still and the moon casts silver ripples across the water, some claim to hear a sound carrying across the lake. Not quite a voice, not quite a whisper, but something in between. A sound that seems to call to something deep within the listener, awaking an inexplicable urge to approach the water's edge, to gaze into its depths, to listen more closely to whatever might be trying to make itself heard. And somewhere beneath those dark waters, whatever waits in Whispering Valley continues its patient vigil, perhaps growing stronger with each passing year, each new generation that forgets the warnings of the past, each curious mind that turns its attention to mysteries better left unexplored.